I'm here at Warsash Sailing Club talking with David SID HOWLETT, who is a coach of huge repute in the British sailing team and has also done a huge amount of sailing in his time. Now, Sid, when did you actually first start sailing?
In the Norfolk Broads at Horning in 1963 or 64, and I can't quite work out which day it was, but with the school chum who took me on holiday with his parents to the Norfolk Broads from school, and I thought it was jolly good. You sort of had a moment where the wind picked up and you went across the water, and I thought, this is fantastic.
And your first sailing, was it racing or were you just going out for fun?
That was just going out for fun, yeah. And then we sailed at Pittsford at Northampton Sailing Club in a GP14. My mum and dad got one, and then so I could sail with them. And
from there, did it progress into racing?
Yes, well, there was racing at Pittsford, yeah, in the GP14, and then the Finn, because there was a Finn fleet at Pittsford at the time.
And was this your first experience with the Finn class?
Yes, absolutely, sort of 67 or 8 or something around that.
And you went into the Royal Navy after this point, but you managed to keep up your sailing during your career?
I did, but then you got to a stage in the Navy where the Navy said, right, you've either now got to buckle down and be a naval officer or go off sailing. And I chose to go off sailing in order to go to the Olympics in 1980, which of course resulted in the boycott of the RYA boycott of Moscow.
And then you were doing a bit of fin sailing, but also a bit of offshore sailing. I believe it was the offshore sailing that you got the name SID came in.
It was during the 1984 season, and I hadn't realised that punk rock had happened, because in the Navy it all just passed you by. You didn't get news so much, and I was off in ships when it happened. I was in a frigate called HMS Achilles and in a minesweeper HMS Lacerton, and I didn't realise it had happened. So when I heard it, I thought, oh, this is quite good. Didn't even know what it was all about. And I saw it all. I think probably it was Neil Graham and Peter Whip who got the name going for me. And then Laurie Smith took it up as well. So.
And the reference was from the Sex Pistols, yes, with Sid Vicious.
Yes, yes.
And so why in particular did they call you Sid?
Well, because I was humming along to all the Six Pistols, sailing what's the one called Anarchy in the UK. Oh, I thought it was jolly good.
Your fin sailing was during the amateur era of sailing in the Olympics. How different were things then to how they are now?
Well, massively different. I mean, it was a huge change when there were two things that happened to change it all. I mean, everybody was amateur at that time, apart from the Eastern Europeans and the Russians. And then the big change round was in 1988, when in the November ISAF meetings, sailing was allowed to be professional. You weren't allowed to be professional before that. Of course, the Eastern Europeans and Russians were breaking the rules 100% because they were professionals. And also they were doping. So and the West really was saying, well, how can we compete against the Eastern Europeans? So they allowed professionalism, and they hoped that people were going to fund it somehow by advertising and sponsorship.
So this transition was really brought about by the West trying to level the playing field and get on an even term.
Absolutely. It wasn't just sailing that went professional at the same time. I think pretty much all the Olympic sports went at the same time. I think it was down to the IOC as well. I'm not sure of my facts on that, but I think it was then.
And you campaigned the Finn through 76, 80, the boycotted games in Moscow.
I was doing the Star up to date.
Star,
yeah.
Yes. And also around the Olympics for 84 as well.
Yeah, Star for 84, yeah.
And that you did the trials for?
Yeah, 84, and then, then 88 we did the trials as well. But then it was, it was still amateur, so it was sort of very, very difficult to do, yeah.
And how did your transition come about from your own sailing to coaching?
Really just because in 88 I went with Mike McIntyre and Bryn Vale with the Star, because they won the trials and we didn't. So me and Craig Nutter, Lightning, who now works in Cowes, came with me as the crew, and we took the boat there, and then effectively I was coaching on the water as well for the time, because there were relatively few restrictions about coaching on the water at the time.
So was this in a role of a two-boat tuning partner
Two-boat tuning, and then during the event on the water with the rib, yeah.
And this, as your first introduction to coaching, a huge amount of success.
Yeah, well, yes. Yeah, it worked out that time. Well, we had, I would have said that one of the biggest things with Seoul 88 was that we had a really good tidal model, which a lot of people didn't have. I mean, an Italian friend of mine who was the world champion, he's Giorgio Gorla, he still didn't realise about the current years later. He didn't understand it at all or known what had happened, and he was the world champion and came. He didn't win a medal, so I'm not sure quite where he came in '88. But
and so you think that was the secret weapon that resulted in Michael Bryn's gold?
There were several factors, but that was one of the big ones. Yeah, for sure.
You've always favoured the technical classes, such as the Star and the Finn. What is it about those boats that really attracts you?
Well, I mean, we went from the Finn and then into offshore sailing, or the ton classes, half tons, 1 tons, Admiral's Cups, and you were always developing the boats. I think I did 10 Admiral's Cups, and so you were getting a new half ton or 1 ton and developing it all year and testing it and tuning it all year. So you had the background to be able to do that. Of course, what's happened now is that people have these manufacturers' one designs, and which are far from even, actually. I mean, I know that in, for instance, 2008, the hull weight range on lasers out of production was plus or minus 2.5 kilos. And they say they're one design, and the mast rate was dramatically different too. They are getting it better now, but there's still inconsistencies in the manufacturers' one designs are far from one design is the answer, no matter how close they'd like to say they are.
With the British sailing team, the transition of going to professional, yes, there were a few medals, but it was 2000 really when the results really came pouring in sailing for the British sailing team. What was the difference that year?
Well, the biggest thing was that in 97 and 8, the lottery sport funding came on side and people were able to go full time. And of course, there was a lot of people that were just on the verge of coming into Olympic sailing that were now able to do it full time. And they had the passion and desire to have done it. And now they suddenly got the funding to do it and the coaching. And they did really well. Ben, Ian, Shirley, Ian Barker and people like that, yeah.
And Ian Percy in the Finn famously won the gold that year.
Yeah.
What was it like out in Sydney with the atmosphere and also just the results the British sailing team obtained?
it was great. I mean, obviously we tried to be, because we're 3 golds and 2 silvers. Is it 3? Yeah. So the single-handed class has got the gold medals. Ian Barker got the medal, and Ian Walker and Mark Cavell.
Yes.
And yeah. So and Mark had sailed with us and won the Etchells Worlds in '96. So I knew Mark really well from that. So it was really good vibe at the time, and of course Brits got on well in Australia. You know, the Australians take the mickey out of you, but there was still a lot of joy between the Brits and Australians, as I said. So it was a fantastic time then. Yes.
And talking of the Brits and Australians, there is an equivalent of you out in Australia, Victor.
Yeah, Victor, funny enough, I saw him a few days ago in Palma. I've been down there with the 470 and the British 470 and 49er, and it's quite funny because there's one hotel I've always stayed in. I found it's quiet, it's away from the place, it's kind of cheap and cheerful. And Victor was in the same place, and he'd found it too. He says, yeah, it's perfect. So funny, 2 old fellows who've been doing it all the time, and found Matt Belcher was there with him, but yeah, we'd found this one place, and yeah, Victor's done it all.
And so while there is of course a great rivalry between Australia and Great Britain in sport, you're quite friendly off the water.
Yeah, yeah. Well, of course, an interesting discussion with Victor, of course, as you get older, you're maybe less able to do it physically, and as long as if your knowledge is always increasing, so you have enormous knowledge compared to the people who are 40 years or more younger than you, and so if you have got that knowledge, you can put it back in, as long as you have the sort of energy and health to do it. You just long that your health is okay. So people like Victor and I always saying to each other, how are you and how's your health, sort of thing. I speak to Victor, yeah, he's great.
And straight after Sydney, it began your long association with Ben Ainslie in the Finn class.
He'd come back from One World. He didn't kind of get on with the America's Cup then, so that was kind of 10 years with Ben. But doing Ian at the same time, Ian and Stevie Mitchell, who funnily enough I had lunch here in this club on Saturday. He started off with Stevie and then of course changed to the late Andrew Simpson.
And what is it, the difference that people like Ben Ainslie and Ian Percy have that make them stand out and win in an elite field?
They're passionate to win, they want to win, and they're prepared to work all hours to do it. So basically harder working than other people. Obviously you have to have everything else going for you. That means to say, well, the talent, the intelligence, the commitment and the funding. So they all link together. If you haven't got one of them, it won't work. So you've got to have all four, let's say.
And with sailing, it's as much a mental game as it is a physical game. Do you think it is that mental strength that actually drives you to the very front of the fleet?
Well, the mental strength just to keep working and keep calm, yeah. I mean, you have to stay calm and hope. I think one of the reasons there's so many repeat winners in sailing is that A, you carry on and you're always 4 years ahead of everybody, but the first time you do it, you can deal with the big time and not get stressed out when you win an event. And I was with Ben at a Finn Worlds in Moscow in 2005, and it was down to the last race to win it against the Greek Emilios, who'd bought his own boat and everybody else had supplied boats. And we were talking about what was going to happen. And I said, well, you mean Emilios has never been in this position before where he could win. He's just absolutely worried about it, and you're not. Hopefully you're not. And I said, it'll just be fine. Don't worry, he'll beat himself. And kind of he did, really. Actually, the last race was finally abandoned with no win. But anyway, but Ben had him well beaten by that stage. But more to the point, he'd beaten himself. So once you've got the ability to win events, like all these people had, then you can maintain the focus and the calmness and the thinking correctly whilst it's all while there is perceived pressure on you. You can just get on and do it.
And then now in this professional era, there is a big team behind every sailor. How key do you think that is?
Well, for sure, it's a lot harder to do it on your own. I mean, the years that I did, and probably your father did years ago, you know, if you're on your own, it's really difficult. But that actually builds its own strengths in you. So you have the ability to go off and do it all. But yeah, it makes it a lot easier, but then also it means the goalposts are moved. And actually I had been away from the Olympic scene for just a little bit, but I was down in Palma now, which has to be one of the biggest regattas. I mean, 1,250 sailors, 250 coaches, which there's a coach for every 5 people, and coach boats and vans and support teams and, you know, national funding and national lotteries, not just the British now. I noticed that Dutch, for instance, have got lottery funding, and, you know, everybody seems to have funding from the countries as well. So it makes it harder in that respect because more people are trying harder to do it with more money put into it.
And moving forwards with the Olympics, the slate for Paris 2024 has changed what's involved in sailing in a big way, especially with the Finn class going out. What are your views on that?
Well, it's just a lack of direction from the top of the sport because, I mean, on the one hand you throw the Star out because it's too expensive, and then bring an offshore two-handed boat in. So, you know, where is the focus on it? And of course, I mean, I don't think the Finn thing's dead, by the way, because what are you going to do in the Olympics if you're over 85 kilos? Although the laser now with the carbon masts might push the weight up. And if they had any smarts at all, they'd try to push the weight of the laser sailor up so he could take it over. But you know, equally, they brought in the laser radial instead of the Europe, which meant the weights of the girls went up because it was 64 kilos in the Europe and then 68, 69 kilos in the laser radial. And the same with the Finn was, sorry, the laser was, let's say, 79 to 82. With the new carbon mast, it's maybe gone up to 85 kilos, but with the Finn is probably, you know, 95, 98, something like that. So they could try and push the laser weight up if they were at all smart. And I don't know if that's what they did in these trials in whether the new rig that they've done for the laser to try to do the single-handed dinghy class is going to have changed that. But otherwise, if you're over 85 kilos, stop Olympic sailing. And I feel really sorry for all the young guys that had an Olympic gold medal in their eyes. I mean, there's an awful lot of the young British guys that wanted to do it, and now that's taken away from them.
And This actually brings up a very good point about attrition in the sport of sailing and keeping people participating. When people come into sailing, a lot of the top Olympic sailors I've spoken to just started sailing for fun at the beginning. How do they keep that fun factor and keep their involvement if they don't make it to the very top?
Yes, they have to keep it fun to keep going for so long, which it's not hard to keep. It shouldn't be hard to keep it fun because it's enormous fun doing it. But to keep going at it, well, they can keep going after Olympic sports, and an awful lot of them do. I mean, a lot of them go into America's Cup or working professionally in the business. So there is a field for them after Olympic sailing, and in fact, it's very. You could argue that it would be, if you've got everything, if you've got some technical knowledge and you've got the Olympic sailing, then you can go into other types of sailing, whatever they may be.
So use the diverse skills that you've gained during your campaign and use them in other areas of the sport.
Yeah, and if you're capable of running an Olympic campaign and being a successful Olympic medal or going to Olympics, that background should give you a leg up in whatever you want to do in life to carry on. And if it doesn't, it's gone wrong somewhere. So the coaching has got, the difficulty in coaching is to guide them, the sailors enough, and enable them to carry on in the future, rather than being the sort of East German model where the coach was in charge and ruled with an iron fist and told them what to do every day. And in fact, I think I see that in quite a lot of people, is that they wait to do what the coach tells them to do. I saw it in Germany when I worked with the Germans. They still had some East German coaches, and the sailors didn't have enough initiative to get off and do it, because unless the coach had told them what to do, they didn't know what to do. So you've got to have the middle ground where the coach is guiding, but the athletes are working. It's a hand-in-hand process. You're both working together towards the same goal, coaching and sailing. So, and then having done that, so the sailor is now set up to carry on, do what he wants with his life, whether it be carrying on Olympic sailing, which will eventually finish, and then going on to other things, but like Ben and Ian with their America's Cup campaigns, and plenty of the other sailors that have coached and on the Olympic campaigns, or coaching or working with sailmakers, etc.
And how do you think the British sailing team's prospects are looking forward to Tokyo 2020?
Yes. When I came back into it and I looked at it, and I did see that they'd done quite a good job getting Stevie Millers and Linton Jenkins in to work with them to develop the technical side of the sport, because that side of the sport had been, or that side of the British Olympic team had been let down a lot. That needs to be built back up, which it is being done, and hopefully with a bit more of that, they can move forward. I mean, I'm working with Giles, and that seems to be working, but just in the background, and Matt Howard's doing all that. So, and some other classes and doing work with, and hopefully we're making a little bit of a difference.
Well, Sid, it's been fascinating to talk to you, and I have to say, great to hear an insight into your own sailing and your coaching and your views on the sport. Thank you very much indeed for your time.
And we haven't even talked about ice boat sailing, and that is where it really is at.